Derek Hastings pulled out a plat map. According to our recorded plat, the area in question is HOA common property. We acquired it earlier this year as part of a boundary adjustment with the previous landowner. Like the conversation was over. Like 12 acres of my family's farm had transferred to his HOA because the paperwork said. So, what he didn't know was that the LLC listed on his quitclaim deed had never existed. This wasn't a strip of pasture or a planned dog park. 3,200 acres. 65 homes. 6 foundations crossing property lines by 10 to 60 feet. A luxury subdivision built partially on land they'd never owned. Derek made the mistake powerful people always make, assuming that. Because documents had been filed and recorded, they must be legitimate. They weren't. Over 8 months, I watched the Lakeview Meadows Homeowners Association. Discover what happens when you forge a deed to cover up encroachments and the real owner shows up with 77 years of continuous title. This is the story of how an HOA that tried to steal my farm ended up selling me their members' houses, not because I wanted revenge. Because property law is slow, relentless, and always favors the person who actually holds the deed. But let me start from the beginning. Before we dive into, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more interesting stories just like this. The farm has been in my family since 1947, 3002, 100 acres of rolling pasture, timber stands, and creek bottomland that my great-grandfather bought for $8,000 after coming home from the war. He cleared the land by hand, built a house with lumber he milled himself, and raised cattle and hay for 40 years before handing it down to my grandfather, who handed it to my father, who handed it to me. I grew up on this land, learned to drive a tractor at 8, mended fences with my dad every summer, spent entire days riding the property lines on horseback, with nothing but a canteen and a dog. Every acre has a memory attached to it: the creek where I caught my first trout, the oak grove where we scattered my mother's ashes, the ridge where you can see 15 miles in every direction on a clear day. The farm is paid off. No mortgage. No liens, just clean title, going back 77 years. We run a modest cattle operation, about 200 head, and lease some acreage to a neighboring farmer for hay. It's not a fortune, but it's steady, honest work. And it's ours. Or at least it was supposed to be. The trouble started about 8 years ago when a developer bought the land to the south. A 400-acre parcel that had been owned by an elderly couple who'd passed without heirs. Within a year, they'd cleared it, paved roads, and started building a subdivision called Lakeview Meadows. Luxury homes, community pool, tennis courts, the whole package. It didn't bother me much. Development happens. The world changes. The houses went up fast. Within 3 years, the subdivision was full 65 homes. Each one bigger and fancier than the last, with manicured lawns and expensive cars in the driveways. They formed an HOA, as subdivisions do, and I figured that was the end of it. They had their community. I had my farm, and the property line between us was clear. At least, that's what I thought. I first noticed something was wrong on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was driving the old access road that runs along the southern boundary of the Farmadirt 2-track. My great-grandfather had cut in the 50s to move equipment between the pastures and the barn. It's not fancy, but it's functional. We've used it every week for as long as I can remember, except this time. There was a sign blocking the road, bright yellow metal, professionally printed, staked into the ground right where the road crossed. Onto my land, no trespassing property. Lakeview Meadows hoavulators will be prosecuted. He stopped the truck and got out, staring at the sign like it might explain itself. This was my road, on my land, and someone had planted a sign claiming it belonged to the HOA. I pulled the sign out of the ground, took some effort. It was planted deep-hand, tossed it in the bed of the truck. Then I kept driving, checking the fence line as I went. A quarter-mile down, I found another sign. Same design, same message. I pulled that one too, and then I saw the stakes. Fresh wooden survey stakes, bright orange ribbons tied to the tops, running in a line parallel to the road. I stopped and walked over to one, crouching down to read the markings. LVMHOA boundary line. Do not RAMOV. My stomach dropped. I followed the stakes across the pasture. They ran for nearly half a mile, cutting through land I'd walked 1,000 times, land my family had owned for 3 generations. And at the far end, near the creek, someone had erected a new sign, not a no trespassing warning this time, but something worse. Future amenity Lakeview Meadows Hopeland Community Park and Dog Run construction begins spring. 2025. I stood there, in the middle of my pasture, holding my hat in my hands, trying to process what I was seeing. They were planning to build a park on my land, and they'd staked it out like it was already theirs. I drove straight to the county recorder's office. If someone had filed a claim or easement on my property, it would be recorded there, and I needed to know what I was dealing with. The clerk, a woman in her 50s named Carol, who'd worked there for 20 years, pulled up my parcel on the computer and started scrolling through the records. Looks like there's a new plat filed about 6 months ago, she said, frowning at the screen. Lakeview Meadows HOA amended common area boundaries. Can I see it? I asked. She printed it out and slid it across the counter. It was a survey map, professionally drawn, with the Lakeview Meadows subdivision outlined in blue and a new section highlighted in green labeled HOA Common Area, acquired 2024. The green section was a 12-acre strip of my farm. This says they acquired it, I said slowly. From who? Carol clicked through a few more screens. There's a reference here to a quitclaim deed, recorded in March. Let me pull that. She printed the deed and handed it to me. It was a single page filled with legal language I didn't fully understand, but the key parts were clear enough. Quitclaim deed grantor, Mitchell Farms LLC grantee. Lakeview Meadows Homeowners Association property. Description. Legal description matching the 12-acre strip consideration. $1 in other valuable consideration. There was a signature at the bottom. Notarized and official looking, except I'd never signed it. I didn't have an LLC, and I'd never agreed to transfer a single square foot of my land to anyone. This is a mistake, I said, my voice tight. Or it's fraud. I never signed this. Carol's expression shifted from neutral to concerned. You should talk to an attorney. If that signature is not yours, and you didn't authorize this transfer, you've got a serious problem. I folded the deed and the plat map, thanked her, and walked out into the parking lot. It's feeling like the ground had shifted under me. Someone had forged a deed, filed it with the county, and used it to claim they owned part of my family's farm. The HOA president showed up at my door 3 days later. I was on the porch, going through boxes of old property documents my father had kept, trying to piece together what had happened, when a black Audi pulled up the gravel drive and parked near the barn. The man who got out was in his 50s, trim and tan, wearing khakis and a polo shirt with the Lakeview Meadows logo embroidered on the chest. He walked toward the porch with the kind of easy confidence that said he was used to people listening when he talked. You must be the owner, he said, extending his hand. I'm Derek Hastings, president of the Lakeview Meadows HOA. I didn't shake. His hand, you put signs on my land. He smiled, thin and practiced. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. There seems to be some confusion about the property boundaries. There's no confusion, I said. Those stakes and signs are on my farm. I want them removed. Derek pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, a copy of the same plat map I'd gotten from the recorder's office. According to our recorded plat, the area in question is HOA common property. We acquired it earlier this year as part of a boundary adjustment with the previous landowner. There is no previous landowner, I said. My family's owned this land since 1947, and I never sold you anything. Mitchell Farms LLC, Derek said, tapping the paper. That's the entity listed on the quitclaim deed. I don't have an LLC. I never signed a quitclaim deed. That document is either a mistake or a forgery. Derek's smile didn't falter, but his tone cooled. I understand you're upset. The fact is, we have a recorded deed. We filed the paperwork, and we've made significant investments planning improvements to that area. You want to dispute it? You're welcome to file a claim with the county, but until then, we're moving forward. I stood up, feeling my pulse tick up. You're not building anything on my land. It's not your land anymore, Derek said calmly. It's community property. Buffer land for the subdivision. We're planning a park, walking trails, a dog run, amenities that will benefit the entire neighborhood. Get off my property, I said, my voice low and steady. Derek stared at me for a long moment, then folded the plat map and tucked it back in his pocket. You should talk to a lawyer, because this isn't going away. We have the legal right to that land, and we're not giving it up just because you don't like it. He walked back to his car, got in, and drove off without another word, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air. I sat back down on the porch, staring at the boxes of documents, and felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. They hadn't just made a mistake. They'd stolen my land, filed false paperwork, and now they were planning to build on it, like it was theirs. I pulled out my phone and called the only attorney I knew, a real estate lawyer named Paul Hendricks, who'd helped my father with some estate planning years ago. Paul, I said when he answered, I need help. Someone forged a deed and recorded it against my farm. Now an HOA is claiming they own part of my land. There was a pause. Then don't sign anything. Don't talk to them again. Get me every document you have. I'll be there tomorrow. The certified letter arrived 2 days later. Thick envelope, return address from a law firm I'd never heard of. Sent on behalf of the Lakeview Meadows HOA. I opened it, standing in the kitchen, and the first line made my hand shake. Notice of acquisition and recorded easement rights, dear Mr. Mitchell. This letter serves as formal notice that the Lakeview Meadows Homeowners Association has approved and recorded the acquisition of a 12-acre parcel formerly associated with the property known as Mitchell Farm, pursuant to a quit-claim deed executed in March 2024. Additionally, the HOA has recorded permanent easement rights for all community members to access, use, and enjoy the acquired parcel as common area property. Construction of planned amenities will commence in spring 2025. Any interference with HOA property rights or construction activities will be considered trespassing and will result in legal action. Please govern yourself accordingly. I read it 3 times, then set it on the table and stared out the window at the land my great-grandfather cleared with his own hands. They hadn't just claimed my land. They'd recorded easements, planned construction, and threatened me with trespassing charges if I tried to stop them. I picked up the phone and called Paul. They're not backing down, I said. They just sent me a letter saying they own it, and I'll be arrested if I interfere. Good, Paul said, and I could hear the edge in his voice. Because now we have everything we need to bury them. Paul Hendricks arrived at the farm the next morning in a truck that had seen better days, carrying a briefcase that looked older than I was. He'd been practicing real estate law for 35 years, most of it helping farmers with estate planning, easements, and boundary disputes. He wasn't flashy, but he was thorough, and right now, thorough was exactly what I needed. We sat at the kitchen table. I laid out everything I had: the forged quitclaim deed, the amended plat map, the certified letter from the HOA's attorney, and 3 generations of family records showing continuous ownership of the farm since 1947. Paul read through it all methodically, making notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally shaking his head. When he finished, he set down his pen and looked at me. This is fraud, plain and simple. A quitclaim deed is bogus, and whoever filed it knew it. Can we prove that? We can start by pulling every document the county has on file related to your parcel and theirs. Then we get a handwriting expert to compare that signature to yours. We hire a surveyor to verify the actual property lines, because I'm willing to bet the HOA's corrected plat doesn't match reality. How long will that take? A week? Maybe 2? But we need to move fast. If they start construction, it gets messier. He tapped the letter from the HOA's attorney. And we need to respond to this before they think silence means surrender. We went back to the county recorder's office that afternoon. Paul knew Carol, the clerk, from years of filing documents, and she greeted him with the kind of familiarity that comes from decades of professional interaction. "Paul," she said, "I had a feeling you'd be back." "We need everything," Paul said. Every document recorded in the last 10 years that mentions either Mitchell Farm or Lakeview Meadows. Deeds, plats, easements, corrections, amendments.
All of it.
Carol nodded and started pulling files. Within an hour, we had a stack of documents, 2 inches thick, spread across a table in the back room. Paul went through them chronologically, building a timeline. "Here's the original plat for Lakeview Meadows," he said, showing me a survey map dated 2016. "This shows the subdivision boundaries as they were approved by the county. Everything inside the blue line is the development. Everything outside is not." He laid another map next to it. "This is the corrected plat they filed in March 2024. See the difference?" I looked closely. The blue boundary line had shifted west, extending into what should have been my farm. The new section, shaded in green, was labeled HOA Common Area. Acquired parcel. They just moved the line, I asked. They filed a corrected plat claiming there'd been a surveying error in the original, and this was the true boundary. But corrected plats are supposed to fix mistakes, not create new property claims. This isn't a correction, it's a land grab. He pulled out the quitclaim deed, and this is how they justified it. They claimed Mitchell Farms LLC transferred the property to them, so the plat adjustment was legitimate. "But Mitchell Farms LLC doesn't exist," I said. "Exactly." Paul flipped through more documents. "There's no corporate filing in the state registry for Mitchell Farms LLC. No tax records. No business license. It's a phantom entity created just for this deed." Carol, who'd been listening quietly from her desk, walked over. "Can I say something off the record?" Paul nodded. "We see this sometimes," she said, her voice low. "Developers or HOAs file questionable documents, and they get recorded because we're not here to investigate every claim. We just verify the notary stamp and file what's submitted. Nobody objects, it stays on the books. But most people never check the records, so they get away with it. Until someone like me shows up," I said. "Until someone like you shows up," Carol confirmed. "And then it unravels." Paul hired a forensic document examiner named Dr. Ellen Reyes, a woman in her 60s who'd testified as an expert witness in hundreds of fraud cases. She met us at Paul's office 3 days later and examined the quitclaim deed under magnification. Comparing the signature to samples of my actual signature from old checks, tax returns, and legal documents, it took her less than an hour to reach a conclusion. "This signature is not consistent with your authenticated samples," she said, showing me a side-by-side comparison on her laptop. "The stroke patterns, letter formation, and baseline alignment are all wrong. Whoever signed this tried to mimic your signature, but they didn't do a good job. Can you testify to that?" Paul asked. "Absolutely, this is forged, no question." Paul made a note. "It gives us criminal grounds. Filing a false instrument is a felony in this state." The surveyor, a man named Tom Caldwell, spent 3 days walking the property with GPS equipment, comparing the actual boundary lines to both the original Lakeview Meadows plat and the corrected version the HOA had filed. When he finished, he called Paul and me to meet him at the southern edge of the farm, right where the subdivision bordered my land. He had a laptop set up on the tailgate of his truck, showing a digital overlay of the survey results. "This is your property line," Tom said, tracing a red line on the screen. "Based on the original 1947 deed, every subsequent survey, and the current GPS coordinates, it's been consistent for 77 years. And this," he continued, tracing a blue line, "is the boundary claimed by the Lakeview Meadows corrected plat. See the difference? The blue line was about 60 feet west of the red line, cutting deep into my pasture. They moved the line to grab land," I said. "Correct. But here's the interesting part." Tom zoomed in on the subdivision itself. "When I surveyed the actual structure's homes, fences, driveways, the clubhouse, I found something." He highlighted several houses near the boundary in yellow. "These 6 homes have encroachments, or back decks, fences, and in 2 cases, portions of the actual house structure cross over onto your property, by 10 to 60 feet, depending on the lot." I stared at the screen. "They built on my land?" "Looks that way, my guess." The original developer cut corners during construction, either ignoring the survey or hoping nobody would notice. When you Didn't object probably because you didn't know. They just kept building. Then, years later, when someone finally realized the problem, they tried to fix it by filing the corrected plat and forged deed to make it look like they'd acquired the land legally. Paul was already taking notes. Can you document all of this? In a formal report? I'll have it to you by Friday, Tom said, with photos, GPS coordinates, and a legal description of every encroachment. We met in Paul's office the following Monday to go over the full scope of what we'd uncovered. He had the documents spread across his conference table like pieces of a puzzle, each one fitting into a larger picture of deception and fraud. Here's what we know, Paul said, ticking off points on his fingers. 1. The quitclaim deed transferring. Land from Mitchell Farms LLC to the HOA is forged. We have expert testimony confirming that. 2. Mitchell Farms LLC doesn't exist. There's no corporate filing, no tax records, nothing. It's a fake entity. 3. The corrected plat filed by the HOA is fraudulent. Claims to fix a surveying error, but the original plat was accurate. They fabricated the error to justify grabbing your land. For the HOA recorded these documents knowing they were false, or at minimum, with reckless disregard for the truth. And 5, this is the big one. Several HOA properties have been encroaching on your farm for years, possibly since the subdivision was built. The corrected plat and forged deed were likely an attempt to paper over those encroachments retroactively. Sat back in my chair, trying to process it all. So they built houses on my land, then forged documents to make it look like they owned it. That's what the evidence suggests, Paul said. And when you didn't notice or object, they got bolder. They filed for the 12-acre common area strip. It's probably planning to use it as a buffer and amenity space, thinking you'd never check the records. What do we do now? Asked. Paul leaned forward, his expression serious. We have several options. You can file a quiet title action to clear the fraudulent deed and plat from the record. We can sue the HOA for trespass and demand they remove the encroachments. We can file a criminal complaint for forgery and filing a false instrument. Or, he paused, can use the fact that they built on your land as leverage to reclaim not just the 12-acre strip, but portions of every structure that crosses your property line. What does that mean? I asked. It means you don't just own a farm, Paul said, pulling up the surveyor's report on his laptop and showing me the highlighted encroachments. You own pieces of their houses, portions that trespass onto your land legally belong to you. And under property law, you have the right to demand they either remove those structures, pay you for the land they're occupying, or he smiled. And it wasn't a kind smile. You can take ownership of the encroaching portions and force them to lease or buy back their own homes from you. I stared at the screen, seeing the 6 yellow highlighted properties, each one sitting partially on land my great-grandfather had cleared 77 years ago. They tried to steal my land, I said quietly. Yes, Paul agreed. And in doing so, they built their homes on property they didn't own, which means you hold the cards. They just don't know it yet. He closed the laptop and looked at me. They didn't just steal a strip of your farm. They built a neighborhood partially on your property. And now we get to decide what happens next. I thought about Derek Hastings standing on my porch telling me the land wasn't mine anymore. Thought about the signs they'd planted, the stakes they'd driven, the letter threatening me with trespassing charges if I interfered with their property. What do you recommend? I asked. Paul smiled. We give them a chance to fix this. Send them a demand letter, lay out the evidence, and offer them a way to settle. If they refuse, we file everything civil criminal. The work's and let the courts sort it out. Either way, they're going to learn a very expensive lesson about forging deeds and building on land they don't own. I nodded slowly. Send the letter. With pleasure, Paul said. The demand letter went out by certified mail and email to the HOA board. Their attorney and every homeowner whose property showed encroachments on the survey. It was 8 pages long, methodical, and professional, laying out the evidence piece by piece, the forged quitclaim deed, the fraudulent plat amendment, expert opinion confirming forgery, and the survey showing 6 homes built partially on my land. The letter gave them 30 days to respond and offered 3 options. Voluntarily vacate and remove all structures from my property. including the planned park area. Negotiate a purchase of the encroached land at fair market value. With proper legal documentation, face civil litigation for trespass, fraud, and slander of title, plus criminal complaints for forgery and filing false instruments. Paul attached 47 pages of supporting documentation deeds, surveys the forensic, signature analysis, corporate search results showing no Mitchell Farms LLC existed, and photos of every encroachment. Derek Hastings called 2 days later, his voice tight. "We need to meet, face to face. This has gotten out of hand." "I agree," I said. "When and where?" "Tomorrow night, 7 p.m., HOA Clubhouse. Bring your attorney." Clubhouse was the kind of building that screamed luxury community, vaulted ceilings, stone fireplace, leather furniture, and a conference room with a table that could seat 20. Paul and I arrived 10 minutes early, carrying bankers' boxes full of documents, set up at one end of the table. The HOA board filed in at 7 sharp. Derek Hastings. A woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Brenda Cole, treasurer. A younger man named Kyle Simmons, vice president. And their attorney, a sharp-dressed guy in his 40s named Michael Porter from a firm that specialized in HOA law. Derek sat at the opposite end of the table, hands folded, his expression somewhere between annoyed and confident. "Let's get this sorted out. You're claiming we don't own the common area parcel? We're saying we do? Seems like a simple title dispute." "It's not a title dispute," Paul said calmly. "Your HOA filed a forged quitclaim deed and a fraudulent plat amendment to claim land that's been owned by the Mitchell family since 1947. Michael Porter, HOA's attorney, opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "We have a recorded deed showing transfer of the property from Mitchell Farms, LLC, to the HOA. That deed was properly notarized and filed with the county. It's presumed valid. It's presumed valid until someone proves it's forged," Paul countered. He slid a copy of Dr. Ray's forensic analysis across the table. "We had a certified handwriting expert compare the signature on that deed to my client's. Authenticated signature samples. Her conclusion: the signature is forged, not similar, not questionable, forged." Michael picked up the report and read it, his expression neutral but his jaw tightening slightly. "Furthermore," Paul continued, "Mitchell Farms LLC doesn't exist. There's no corporate filing in the state registry, no tax records, no business license. It's a phantom entity created solely for the purpose of this fraudulent deed." He slid another document across. "Here's the corporate search results. No such entity has ever been registered." Derek leaned forward. "This is ridiculous. That land has been maintained by the HOA for years. We've mowed it, posted signs, treated it as common property. If there was a problem with the title, why didn't you object before now?" "Because I didn't know," I said, my voice calm but firm. "No. You filed the deed 6 months ago. I found out 3 weeks ago when you started planting stakes and signs on my pasture. You didn't notify me. You didn't ask permission. You just filed false documents and assumed I'd never check." "We have color of title," Brenda said, her voice defensive. "Out. Even if there's an issue with the original transfer, we've established rights through adverse possession." Paul shook his head. "Adverse possession requires hostile use for a statutory period, usually 10 to 20 years depending on the state. You can't claim adverse possession when you've only been asserting ownership for 6 months. And even if you could, the use has to be open, notorious, and without the owner's permission. My client just told you you don't have permission. That clock stops now." Michael cleared his throat. "Let's talk about the encroachments. Your survey claims 6 properties have structures on your client's land. That's a separate issue from the common area dispute." "It's not separate," Paul said. "It's the whole point. Your developer built homes that encroach onto my client's farm, probably knowingly, possibly by accident. Either way, when someone finally realized the problem, instead of fixing it honestly, they tried to cover it up by filing fraudulent documents to make it look like the HOA had acquired the land. The 12-acre common area claim is just the latest attempt to paper over the original encroachments." Derek's face had gone red. "You're saying we deliberately forged a deed? That's slander?" "It's not slander if it's true," Paul replied. We have the evidence to prove it. The forged signature, the fake LLC, the fraudulent plat. Someone in your organization, whether it was the developer, a past board member, or current leadership, committed fraud. And now we're giving you the chance to fix it before this becomes a criminal matter. Criminal. Kyle, the vice president, spoke for the first time, his voice uncertain. You're threatening us with criminal charges? I'm not threatening, Paul said. I'm informing. Filing a false instrument is a felony in this state. Forgery is a felony. If we file a complaint with the district attorney, and we will, if this isn't resolved, they'll investigate. And whoever signed or authorized that deed will face charges. Room went quiet. Michael whispered something to Derek, who shook his head sharply. This is a shakedown, Derek said, his voice rising. You're trying to extort money from hardworking families who bought homes in good faith? We're not paying you a dime. I'm not asking you to pay me, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm asking you to acknowledge reality. You filed a fake deed. You built on my land. And now you're threatening to build a park on property you don't own. I'm offering you a way to fix this. You can remove the encroachments by the land properly, or negotiate an easement. But you don't get to keep pretending you own something you stole. Derek stood abruptly. This meeting is over. We're not negotiating with someone trying to con us, Michael. Send him a response rejecting everything. Michael looked uncomfortable but nodded. We'll respond in writing. Paul and I packed up our documents and walked out, leaving the board sitting in tense silence. The HOA's response came 3 days later. Not a letter to us, but an email sent to every homeowner in Lakeview Meadows. Someone forwarded it to me within an hour. Subject: Urgent community under attack, dear Lakeview Meadows residents, the HOA. Board wants to make you aware of a serious threat to our community. A neighboring landowner is attempting to extort money from the HOA by making false claims about property ownership. This individual alleges that portions of our community, including the planned park area and several homes, are built on his land. These claims are baseless and have been thoroughly reviewed by our legal team. The HOA holds clear, recorded title to all common areas and has maintained these properties for years. We will not be intimidated by extortion tactics, and we will defend your home values at all costs. Please do not communicate with this individual or his representatives. All inquiries should be directed to the board. We are taking every legal step necessary to protect this community. Thank you for your support, Derek Hastings. HOA President Paul read the email and laughed bitterly. He just called you an extortionist in writing and sent it to 65 households? That's defamation. Add it to the list, I said. Oh, I will. But first we respond, publicly and on the record. Paul drafted a letter that went out the next day to every homeowner, CC'd to the board and their attorney, and filed with the county recorder as a public notice. Notice to Lakeview Meadows homeowners, title defect and pending litigation, dear homeowner. You recently received an email from your HOA board claiming that my client's property claims are baseless. That statement is false. Attached you will find a forensic analysis confirming the quitclaim deed filed by your HOA contains a forged signature. Corporate search results showing Mitchell Farms LLC does not exist and never has a professional. Survey showing that 6 homes in your community have structures encroaching 10 to 60 feet onto my client's property. The original 1947 deed and continuous chain of title proving my client's family has owned this land for 77 years, your HOA board filed. Fraudulent documents to claim land they do not own. If you live in one of the affected properties, your title may be compromised. Your ability to sell or refinance could be impacted. I strongly recommend you consult your own attorney. Review your title insurance policy. A lawsuit will be filed within 14 days unless this matter is resolved. Paul attached every piece of evidence. He had 62 pages total and sent it. Certified mail to every address in the subdivision. The next step was filing the formal complaints. Paul prepared a civil complaint for quiet title and fraud, and a criminal complaint with the county district attorney and state attorney general alleging forgery and filing of false instruments. But before filing the civil suit, he did one more thing. He recorded a lis pendenza, notice of pending litigation, against every property in Lakeview Meadows that had encroachments. plus the 12-acre common area parcel. A lis pendens is a public record that warns anyone interested in buying or financing a property that there's a legal dispute affecting the title. It doesn't prove anything. It clouds the title and makes the property nearly impossible to sell or refinance until the dispute is resolved. Paul filed it on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, my phone started ringing. The first call was from a panicked homeowner named Sarah Chen. I was supposed to close on the sale of my house next week, she said, her voice shaking. My buyer's title company just found the lis pendens and they're backing out. Is this real? Do you really own part of my house? I own the land your deck and backyard fence are sitting on, I said gently. According to the survey, about 15 feet of your property crosses onto my farm. Oh my God, she whispered. What do I do? Talk to your attorney. Talk to your HOA board. Because they're the ones who filed the fake deed that created this mess. The second call was from a mortgage broker representing a homeowner trying to refinance. We can't proceed with a lis pendens on file. Can you release it? Not until the title issue is resolved, I said. The third, fourth, and fifth calls were all variations of the same panic. Sales falling through, refinances denied. Title insurance companies refusing to issue policies by Tuesday. Derek Hastings left me a voicemail, his voice no longer confident but strained and angry. You've destroyed our property values. People can't sell. They can't refinance. You're going to pay for this? I didn't call him back because the truth was, I hadn't destroyed anything. They'd built their community on a foundation of lies and forged paperwork, and now that foundation was crumbling. It's one property at a time. The lis pendens hit Lakeview Meadows like a financial bomb. Within 72 hours, 3 home sales collapsed, 2 refinances were denied. And a homeowner trying to take out a home equity loan was told by their bank that the property was encumbered by pending litigation and therefore ineligible for new financing. Real estate agents started calling the HOA office demanding answers. Title companies flagged every property in the subdivision for additional review. And homeowners who'd never paid attention to board meetings suddenly wanted explanations for why their biggest investment had just become unsellable. The panic spread fast. I heard about it through forwarded emails and voicemails from homeowners who'd gotten my contact information from Paul's letter. Some were angry, accusing me of destroying their lives. Others were confused, asking if this was real or some kind of scam. A few were apologetic, saying they'd had no idea the HOA had done anything wrong and just wanted to know how to fix it. I referred them all to Paul and stayed out of it. This was between them and their HOA board now, but one call stood out. Name was Margaret Forrester, and she introduced herself as a retired prosecutor who'd bought a home in Lakeview Meadows 6 years ago. Her voice was calm, measured, and carried the weight of someone who'd spent decades sifting through evidence and identifying lies. I've read your attorney's letter, she said, and I've pulled my own title documents. I need to know, is the signature on that quitclaim deed actually forged, or is this a legal tactic? It's forged, I said. We had a forensic document examiner analyze it. She testified to it in court. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then we have a serious problem, because if the board knowingly filed a forged deed, that's not just a civil matter. That's criminal fraud. I know, I said. We've already prepared a complaint for the district attorney. Don't file it yet, she said. Give me a week. I want to dig into this myself. If there's a paper trail showing intent, we need to find it before this goes to the prosecutor. Otherwise, the board will claim ignorance and blame some unnamed previous administration. What are you looking for? Asked. Emails, meeting minutes, anything showing the board knew about the encroachments and chose to cover them up instead of fixing them. She paused. I spent 32 years putting people in prison for fraud. If someone in this HOA committed a crime, I want to make sure they can't talk their way out of it. Margaret worked fast. Within 3 days, she'd requested and received, under the state's HOA transparency laws, every board meeting minute, email archive, and financial record going back to the subdivision's founding in 2016. She called me on a Thursday night. You need to see this. Can you come to my house tomorrow? I drove to Lakeview Meadows the next morning and met her at a 2-story colonial near the back of the subdivision. She answered the door in jeans and a sweater, reading glasses perched on her nose, and led me to a dining room table covered in printed emails and highlighted documents. "I found the smoking gun," she said, handing me a printout. "This is an email from 2019, sent by the original developer's project manager to the first HOA board president." I read it slowly: from JK line at breslindev.com to president at lakeviewmeadowshoa.org. Subject: Boundary issue, Mitchell Farm. Date: June 14, 2019. Rick. Our surveyor flagged an issue during final inspections. 6 of the homes on the south end lots 58 to 63 have encroachments onto the adjacent farm property. Decks, fences, and in 2 cases, portions of the foundation cross the property line by 10 to 50 feet. The farmer Mitchell is elderly and hasn't raised any objections. Honestly, I don't think he's even aware. My recommendation? We don't bring it up. If he ever notices and complains, we can negotiate an easement or small purchase after the fact. No need to alarm the homeowners or delay closings over this. Let me know if you have concerns, but I think we're fine to proceed as is. Jakai looked up at Margaret. They knew from the beginning. "It gets worse," she said, handing me another email, this one from 22/2, from president at lakeviewmeadowshoa.org to dbrooks@porterlaw.com. Subject: Encroachment Resolution. Date: April 3, 2022. David. Following up on our conversation about the Mitchell Farm boundary issue, the encroachments have been there since construction 2018-2019, and the property owner has never objected. He's in his 80s now and doesn't seem aware. You mentioned we could file a corrective plat and quit-claim deed to retroactively clean up the title. Can we move forward with that? I'd rather handle this quietly than alert the membership and cause panic about property values. The affected homeowners don't know their structures cross the line, and I'd like to keep it that way. Let me know next steps. Rick Donovan, HOA President Rick Donovan, I said. Who's that? Previous HOA President. Served from 2018 to 2023. He's the one who authorized the forged deed. Margaret pulled out another document, the response from the attorney, from dbrooks@porterlaw.com to president at lakeviewmeadowshoa.org. Subject: Re-encroachment resolution. Date: April 8, 2022. Rick, I can draft a corrective plat and quit-claim deed, but you'll need a signature from the property owner Mitchell or a valid corporate entity if the farm operates as an LLC. Without that, filing would be improper. If Mitchell is unaware and unlikely to object, another option is to wait and claim adverse possession after the statutory period, 15 years in this state. You're already halfway there. Let me know how you want to proceed. David. And here's the kicker, Margaret said, showing me one more email dated 2 weeks later from president at lakeviewmeadowshoa.org to dbrooks@porterlaw.com. Subject: Move forward. Date: April 22nd, 2022. David, let's go ahead with the plat and deed. I'll handle the signature issue on my end. Just file it and we'll deal with any questions if they come up. The old man probably won't even notice, and if he does, we'll settle quietly. No need to involve the board or membership in the details. Ricky set the email down, feeling cold settle in my chest. He told the attorney he'd handle the signature. That's forgery. It's conspiracy to commit forgery, Margaret corrected, and filing a false instrument, and fraud. She pulled off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Rick Donovan committed a felony. And David Brooks, the attorney, might be complicit if he knew the signature wasn't legitimate. Where's Rick now? I asked. Moved to Florida last year. Sold his house right before Derek took over as president. Convenient timing? And Derek? I asked. Did he know? Margaret shuffled through more documents. I found an email from Derek to Rick, dated January 2023, right after Derek was elected. He asked about outstanding title issues, and Rick responded, saying everything was resolved and recorded. Derek might not have known the deed was forged, but he knew there had been an encroachment problem, and he chose not to investigate. She stacked the emails neatly and looked at me. This is enough for a criminal case. The state attorney general needs to see this. Paul filed the criminal complaint the following Monday, sending copies of Margaret's evidence to both the county, district attorney, and the state attorney general's office within 2 weeks. An investigator named Claire Donovan, no relation to Rick, contacted us to schedule interviews. She met with me, Paul, and Margaret at Paul's office, recording everything, taking detailed notes, and reviewing every email, survey, report, and forensic analysis we had. This is one of the clearest fraud cases I've seen in years, Claire said when we finished. Forged signature, fake corporate entity, intent documented in writing. If we can get Rick Donovan to cooperate, we might be able to trace this all the way back to the developer. What happens next? I asked. We present this to the prosecutor. If they agree, and I think they will, we'll open a grand jury investigation. Could take a few months, but based on this evidence, I'd expect indictments. Against who? Margaret asked. Rick Donovan, definitely. Possibly the developer's project manager if we can prove he was involved in the cover-up. The attorney, David Brooks, is trickier. He might claim he relied on his client's representations, but if we can show he knew the signature was fraudulent, he's in trouble too. Claire closed her notebook and looked at me. In the meantime, you have leverage. A lot of it. Those homeowners with encroachments are stuck. They can't sell, can't refinance, and they're liable for trespassing on your land. You could force them to tear out decks, move fences, even demolish portions of their homes. I don't want to do that, I said. And then you have another option, Paul said, leaning forward. You can purchase the encroaching portions of their structures, take legal ownership of the decks, fences, and in some cases, parts of the houses themselves. Then you decide what to do: lease them back, sell them back, negotiate easements. But either way, you're in control. I stared at him. Buy their houses? Not the whole house. Just the parts sitting on your land. Under property law, structures affixed to land become part of the land. If their deck is on your property, you own the deck. If part of their foundation crosses the line, you own that portion of the foundation. Margaret nodded slowly. It's aggressive, but it's legal. Given what they did to you, forging deeds, threatening you, calling you an extortionist, it's fair. I thought about Derek standing on my porch telling me the land wasn't mine anymore. Thought about the signs they'd planted, the park they'd planned to build, the emails where they'd discussed covering up the encroachments and hoping I'd never notice. How would that work? I asked. Paul pulled out a legal pad and started sketching. We identify every structure that encroaches. We record deeds showing you own those portions. Then we offer the homeowners 2 options: buy back the encroaching portions at fair market value, or lease them from you on reasonable terms. Either way, you're compensated for the trespass, and they get clear title. And if they refuse, then you own pieces of their houses, Paul said simply. They're living in structures they don't fully control. I sat back, staring at the emails Margaret had uncovered. The evidence of lies and forgery and deliberate fraud. They'd tried to steal my land. Now, I was about to own their houses. And the irony wasn't lost on me. Paul spent 2 weeks drafting the proposal. It was 15 pages long, written in language clear enough for homeowners to understand, but legally airtight enough to survive any challenge. He ran it past 3 other attorneys, a title insurance expert, and Margaret, who reviewed it with a prosecutor's eye for loopholes. When he was satisfied, he sent it by certified mail to the HOA board, their attorney. And every homeowner in Lakeview Meadows whose property showed encroachments on the survey, the letter opened with a simple statement of fact. Resolution proposal. Encroachment and title defects. Your property has structures built partially on land owned by Mitchell Farm. This encroachment was caused by errors or deliberate actions during the original development, and was subsequently covered up through the filing of fraudulent documents. You are now living in a home with clouded title. You cannot sell. You cannot refinance. And you are technically trespassing on private property. I am offering you 2 paths forward to resolve this situation fairly and permanently. Paul laid out the options clearly. Option 1, purchase and lease back of encroaching portions I will purchase. The portions of your structure that encroach onto my property decks, fences, portions of foundations, driveways, etc., at a nominal cost of $1. In exchange, I will grant you a 30-year ground lease for those portions at a rate of $50 per month, $600 a year. This clears your title, makes your property sellable and refinanceable, and gives you long-term stability. The lease will include standard maintenance terms and the option to purchase the encroaching land outright at fair market value if you choose to do so in the future. Option 2, full structure purchase with lease back. If you prefer not to own a property with a split ownership structure, I will purchase your entire home structure only, not the land it sits on at fair appraised value. You will then lease the home back from me under a long-term agreement, 30 years. At a reasonable monthly rate, this option provides you with immediate cash, clears all title issues, and allows you to continue living in your home without the burden of a clouded deed. Option 3, remove encroachments at your expense. You may choose to physically remove all encroaching structures, decks, fences, portions of foundations, and restore my property line. This option is available, but is likely to be expensive and may render your home unsellable or significantly reduce its value. The letter concluded with a deadline, 30 days to respond, and a note that failure to choose an option would result in legal action to remove the encroachments or claim ownership by default. Paul attached appraisals for each affected property, showing exactly what portions encroached, by how many feet, and what fair market value would be for both the encroaching portions and the full structures. "This is aggressive," Paul said when he handed me the final draft. "But it's fair. You're not throwing anyone out. You're not demolishing homes. You're giving them a way to fix a problem they didn't create. We're being compensated for land that's been trespassed on for years." "What do you think they'll do?" I asked. "Panic first. Then some will negotiate. Smart ones will take option 1, it's the cheapest and simplest. The ones who can't handle the idea of a ground lease will take option 2, and Derek will tell them all to refuse and fight, because admitting you're right means admitting the HOA screwed up. And if they refuse," Paul smiled grimly, "then we go to court, win, and take ownership anyway. But it'll cost them a lot more in legal fees and stress." Response from the HOA board came within 48 hours. Not a letter to me, but an emergency email to the entire community. Sent late on a Friday night, when people were most likely to read it in a panicked subject. "Urgent, do not sign Ann White, Cheyenne Jadir, Lakeview Meadows residents. You may have received a letter from the individual claiming to own portions of our community. This letter is part of a calculated hostile takeover attempt designed to steal your homes and extort money from hardworking families. The so-called options presented are not offers. They are threats. If you sign any of these documents, you will be surrendering ownership of your home to an outsider who has no interest in this community and no right to make these demands. The HOA board, in consultation with our legal team, is fighting this aggressively. We have filed motions to dismiss the fraudulent list pendants and are pursuing all available legal remedies to protect your property rights. Do not communicate with this individual or his attorney. Do not sign any documents. Do not negotiate individually. We will defend this community at all costs. Stand with us, and we will prevail. Derek Hastings. President, Lakeview Meadows HOA Board of Directors Margaret forwarded the email to me with a one-line comment. "He's panicking. This is going to backfire." She was right. The first call came on Monday morning. A man named Brian Coulter, one of the 6 homeowners with encroachments, left a voicemail asking if Paul could explain the options in plain language because he didn't trust what the board was saying anymore. Paul called him back and they talked. For an hour, Brian's deck extended 14 feet onto my property. He'd been trying to sell his house for 2 months, and 3 potential buyers had walked away after their title companies flagged the list pendants. "I can't afford to fight this," Brian said. "And honestly, I don't even know what I'm fighting for. If your client really owns the land and my deck is on it, then I'm in the wrong, aren't I?" "You're not in the wrong," Paul said gently. "Bought a house in good faith. The developer built it incorrectly, and the HOA tried to cover it up. You're a victim here, just like my client. So what do I do? Option 1 is probably your best bet. You sell the deck to my client for $1, sign a ground lease for $50 a month, and your title gets cleared. You can sell your house, refinance, whatever you need. The lease is long-term and stable, 30 years. Renewable. Fair terms. Brian was quiet for a moment. And if I don't, then the list pendant stays on your property until this is resolved in court. Could be a year, could be 2. And even if the HOA wins, which they won't, your title is still clouded because the encroachment is real and documented. Can I think about it? Take your time. But the offer expires in 3 weeks. Brian signed 4 days later. He was the first. The second was a woman named Rachel Gomez, single mother who'd bought her home 3 years ago and was now facing foreclosure because she couldn't refinance her adjustable rate mortgage. Her fence and part of her driveway encroached onto my land by 18 feet. She came to Paul's office in person, near tears, carrying her 2-year-old daughter. "I don't know what to do," she said. "The bank says I need to refinance by next month or my rate goes up by 3 points. I can't afford that. But the title company won't approve the refi because of the list pendants. And Derek keeps saying if I negotiate with you, I'm betraying the community." Paul handed her a tissue and walked her through option 1. This clears your title. The list pendants gets lifted from your property specifically once the deed and lease are recorded. You'll be able to refinance? How much will it cost me? $50 a month for the ground lease. That's it. You can buy the land outright later if you want, at fair market value. Rachel looked at the documents, then at her daughter, then back at Paul. "Where do I sign?" She signed that afternoon. The third was a retired couple, Ed and Susan Martinez, who'd built their dream deck overlooking the farm, except 22 feet of it was on my land. They'd already had one buyer back out, and their real estate agent had told them bluntly, "You're not selling this house until the title is clear." Ed called Paul, furious at first, demanding to know why I was destroying their retirement plans. Paul listened patiently, then explained the history, the forged deed, the encroachments. The emails showing the HOA had known and covered it up. "So, the HOA screwed us," Ed said quietly. "Yes, and now we're paying for it. I'm offering you a way to fix it without losing your home or your equity," Paul said. Option 1 clears your title. You keep living here. You can sell whenever you want. The lease is affordable and long-term. Ed talked it over with Susan. They signed 2 days later. By the end of the second week, 5 of the 6 affected homeowners had signed agreements. They sold me the encroaching portions of their properties for $1, signed 30-year ground leases at $50 a month, and received clean title documentation that allowed them to sell, refinance, or simply live in peace. Paul recorded the deeds with the county, and within days, the list pendants was lifted from those specific properties. Title companies approved refinances. Real estate agents reactivated listings. Life started moving again for those families. The one holdout was a man named Greg Paulson, who owned one of the 2 homes with foundation encroachments, meaning part of his actual house structure was on my land. He refused to negotiate, insisted the HOA would handle it, and told Paul he'd rather tear the house down than give in to extortion. "Let him sit," Paul advised. "When he sees everyone else moving forward and he's the only one stuck, he'll come around." Derek called me directly, violating his own no-contact order, and left a voicemail that was equal parts rage and desperation. "You're tearing this community apart. People are signing away their homes because you've scared them into thinking they have no choice. This is a hostile takeover, and when this goes to court, you're going to lose everything. I hope you're ready for that." I didn't call him back, because the truth was, I wasn't tearing anything apart. The community had been built on a lie, literally. On land they didn't own, and that lie had finally caught up with them. I was just the one holding the deed that proved it, and now one signed agreement at a time. I was becoming the legal owner of not just 3,200 acres of farmland, but pieces of the houses that had tried to steal it from me. The irony wasn't lost on Derek, and judging by the panic in his voice, he was finally starting to understand just how badly he'd miscalculated. The shift happened fast. Once word spread that Brian, Rachel, and the Martinezes had signed agreements and cleared their titles. The fear that had paralyzed the rest of the community transformed into something else. Urgency. Homeowners who'd been waiting to see what happened, who'd trusted Derek's assurances that the HOA would handle it, suddenly realized that the people who'd negotiated were the ones moving forward with their lives while everyone else remained stuck. Rachel refinanced her mortgage within a week of signing, saving herself $400 a month. The Martinezes accepted an offer on their home full asking price, no title objections, and closed 30 days later. Brian listed his house and had 2 offers within 48 hours. Meanwhile, the holdouts couldn't do anything. Couldn't sell, couldn't refinance. Couldn't even get a home equity line of credit because every lender flagged the clouded title and walked away. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The second wave started on a Tuesday morning when a homeowner named Lisa Tran called Paul's office. Her property didn't have encroachments. Her house was safely within the original subdivision boundaries, but she'd been watching the chaos unfold and had a question. If I don't have encroachments, why is there still a lis pendens on my property? She asked. Paul explained. The lis pendens covers the entire 12-acre common area strip that the HOA claimed through the forged deed. Since that area is designated as HOA common property in your subdivision's recorded plat, and you're a member of that HOA, the title defect technically affects everyone. So even though my house is fine, I'm trapped because the HOA filed fake paperwork? Essentially, yes. There was a long pause. Can I buy my way out? Separate from the HOA entirely and get clear title? Paul had been waiting for this question. Technically, you already own your house and the lot it sits on, separate from the common area. But as long as you're part of the HOA, and the HOA's plat includes fraudulent claims, your title is connected to their mess. If you want true independence, you'd need to disassociate from the HOA or have them dissolve it entirely. How do I do that? You'd need a membership vote, 2/3 majority. To dissolve, usually, or you could petition to remove your property from the HOA covenants, but that requires court approval and can be expensive. Lisa thanked him and hung up. 2 hours later, she drafted a petition to dissolve the Lakeview Meadows HOA and started circulating it through the neighborhood. By the end of the week, Lisa had 40 signatures. By the end of the second week, she had 53, more than enough for a membership vote. Derek tried to block it, claiming the petition was improperly formatted and submitted outside the designated annual meeting cycle. Margaret Hood joined Lisa's effort, responded with a 12-page legal memo citing state HOA law and the bylaws Derek himself had approved, proving the petition was valid, and the vote had to be scheduled within 30 days. The special meeting was set for a Thursday night, and the clubhouse was packed. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, the air thick with tension and frustration. Derek stood at the front, looking thinner than he had a month ago, his confident demeanor replaced with something that looked like exhaustion. This vote is a mistake, he said, his voice strained. If we dissolve the HOA, we lose our collective bargaining power. We lose our ability to fight this lawsuit. We're surrendering. We already lost, Margaret said from the third row. The lawsuit's over. The deed was forged. The encroachments are real. The only question now is whether we keep bleeding money on legal fees or accept reality and move on. I'm not giving up, Derek said. Then you're on your own, Lisa replied. Because the rest of us are done. The vote was called. 58 homeowners voted to dissolve the HOA. 7 voted against. Derek resigned that night, walking out of the clubhouse without another word that the criminal case moved forward in parallel. The state prosecutor, armed with Margaret's evidence and testimony from Claire Donovan's investigation, offered plea deals to 2 key players, Jake Klein, the developer's project manager who'd written the original email about ignoring the encroachments, and Rick Donovan, the former HOA president who'd authorized the forged deed. Jake took the deal first. In exchange for immunity, he testified that the developer had known about the encroachments from day one, discussed fixing it later if the farmer ever complained. and had deliberately chosen not to disclose the issue to buyers because it would delay sales and hurt profits. We figured the old man wouldn't notice or wouldn't care, Jake said in his deposition, recorded and submitted to the court. And if he did, we'd just buy the strip of land for cheap and move on. It was a calculated risk. Rick's testimony was even more damaging. He admitted he'd known the quitclaim deed was fraudulent, that he'd worked with an attorney to draft it, and that he'd signed documents falsely claiming to represent Mitchell Farms LLC, knowing no such entity existed. I thought we could paper over the problem, Rick said, his voice flat. The farmer was old. I didn't think anyone would check the records. And if they did, I figured we'd be protected by some kind of statute of limitations or adverse possession. I was wrong. The prosecutor used their testimony to build a case not just against Rick and Jake, but against the developer Breslin Development Corporation for fraud, conspiracy, and filing false instruments. Breslin settled out of court 3 months later, paying $1.2 million in restitution to me, the affected homeowners, and the state, and agreeing to a consent decree that barred them from operating in the county for 10 years. Rick Donovan pleaded guilty to forgery and filing a false instrument. He received 2 years probation, a $50,000 fine, and a permanent bar from serving on any HOA board in the state. Derek, in a last desperate move, filed a personal lawsuit against me, claiming I had tortiously interfered with the HOA's operations and colluded with disgruntled residents. To destroy the community, the lawsuit was filed in late April and dismissed in early May. Judge William Branson, the same jurist who had overseen several high-profile property disputes in the county, read Derek's complaint, read Paul's motion to dismiss, and issued a ruling that was as brief as it was brutal. Plaintiff's claims are entirely without merit. Defendant holds superior documented title to the land in question. Plaintiff's HOA filed fraudulent documents in an attempt to claim that land. Defendant's actions to protect his property rights are not tortious interference. They are the lawful exercise of ownership. Furthermore, defendant offered reasonable settlement terms to affected homeowners, which many accepted. Plaintiff's characterization of this as collusion is absurd. Complaint dismissed with prejudice. Defendant is awarded attorney's fees in the amount of $38,000. Derek was ordered to pay my legal fees within 60 days. He never did. Paul filed a judgment lien against Derek's property, and when Derek tried to sell his house to escape the debt, the lien attached to the proceeds, he moved out of state 2 months later. By midsummer, the reality of what had happened was undeniable. Of the 65 homes in Lakeview Meadows, I now held legal title to portions of 6 homes, the ones with structural encroachments. Full ownership of the structures on 18 others homeowners who'd chosen option 2 and sold me their houses in exchange for leaseback agreements. And ground leases on another 12 properties where owners had negotiated individual deals to clear their titles. 36 of the original 65 homeowners had signed agreements with me in some form. The remaining 29 owned their homes outright and had no encroachments, so their titles cleared automatically. Once the fraudulent plat and quitclaim deed were formally voided by court order, the HOA was dissolved. The planned park was abandoned. The no trespassing HOA property signs were taken down and replaced with simple, honest markers. Private property, Mitchell Farm. The neighborhood still existed, but it was no longer Lakeview Meadows HOA. It was just ... a neighborhood. Homes on land, some owned, some leased, all with clear, honest documentation. I stood on the ridge at the highest point of the farm on a Saturday morning in late June, looking out over the land my great-grandfather had cleared 77 years ago. The pastures stretched out in front of me, rolling green hills dotted with cattle, the creek winding through the bottomland and beyond it, the subdivision that had tried to take it all. I held the survey map in my hands, the one Tom Caldwell had prepared months ago, showing every boundary line, every encroachment, every structure that now legally belonged to me. 3,200 acres of farmland, 6 partial houses, 18 full structures, and a dozen ground leases generating steady income. It wasn't what I'd wanted. I'd never wanted to be a landlord, or own pieces of other people's homes. I just wanted to protect the land my family had worked for 3 generations. But when someone tries to steal from you, when they forge documents, plant fake signs, and tell you your own land isn't yours, anymore, you don't just walk away. You show up with the truth, with deeds and surveys and patience, and you let the law do what it's designed to do. Protect the person who actually owns the property. Derek had stood on my porch and told me the land wasn't mine anymore. It was community property, that I should accept reality and move on. Now he was gone. The HOA was dissolved, and I was standing on a ridge overlooking 3,200 acres that had never stopped being mine, holding a map that proved it. Sometimes the universe has a sense of irony, and sometimes all it takes is one forged signature to bring down an entire kingdom, built on lies. I folded the map, tucked it into my jacket, and walked back down the ridge toward the barn. The farm was still here, still working, still in my family, and every single person who'd tried to take it had learned the same lesson. You can't steal land. You can only borrow time until the real owner shows up with a deed. And when that happens, all the fake paperwork in the world won't save you. The farm settled into a new rhythm over the following months. The cattle still grazed the pastures. The hay still got cut and baled in late summer. The creek still ran clear through the bottomland where my great-grandfather had first staked his claim 77 years ago, but now, along the southern edge where Lakeview Meadows bordered the property, things looked different. The bright yellow, no trespassing HOA property signs were gone, pulled up and hauled away the week after the HOA dissolved. In their place, I'd put up simple wooden markers every 100 yards along the fence line. Private property, Mitchell Farm, access by permission only. No threats, no legalese. It's just a clear statement of fact. The old access road, the one Derek had tried to claim as HOA property, was back in use by me for moving equipment and checking fence lines. And by a handful of neighbors I'd given permission to use it for walking dogs or jogging. It wasn't complicated. They'd asked politely. I'd said yes, and we'd shaken hands on it. No need for recorded easements or HOA covenants, just common sense and mutual respect. The homeowners who'd signed agreements with me fell into 3 categories, and I treated each one differently based on how they'd handled the situation. The first group, people like Rachel, Brian, and the Martinezes, had encroachments they didn't know about, had acted in good faith when they discovered the truth, and had negotiated honestly. For them, I kept the lease terms exactly as promised, $50 a month for 30 years, with an option to purchase the encroached land at fair market value anytime they wanted. Rachel took me up on that option. 8 months later, she'd refinanced, stabilized her finances, and saved enough to buy the 18 feet of land her fence and driveway sat on. We closed the sale for $8,500, appraised value, no markup, no games. She sent me a thank you card with a photo of her daughter playing in the backyard, and wrote, "Thank you for being fair when you didn't have to be." Good. The second group, homeowners who'd chosen option 2 and sold me their structures in exchange for leaseback agreements, got stable, long-term leases at below market rates. I wasn't trying to profit off them. I just wanted fair compensation for the land, and assurance that no one would try this again. Most of them stayed. A few sold their leaseback agreements to new buyers who were happy to rent a nice home with a long-term, predictable lease in a quiet neighborhood. It worked. The third group, the people who'd been part of the cover-up or had actively supported Derek's lies, got exactly what the contract specified. No favors, no discounts. No flexibility. Greg Paulson, the last holdout with the foundation. Encroachment finally came around 9 months after everyone else had signed. By then, he'd burned through $40,000 in legal fees trying to fight me, lost 2 potential buyers, and had his property foreclosed on by the bank. When he finally called Paul, desperate and defeated, asking if the offer was still available, Paul said yes, but at revised terms. The lease rate went from $50 a month to $150 a month, reflecting the cost and time he'd wasted. Argument, I didn't feel good about it, but I didn't feel bad either. He'd had the same opportunity as everyone else, and had chosen to fight out of pride. That was his decision. The neighborhood itself transformed in quieter ways. With the HOA dissolved, there was no board, no covenants, no architectural review committee. Just people living in homes, mowing their lawns and getting along. Margaret and Lisa, along with a few other residents, formed a simple neighborhood committee, not an HOA, just a voluntary group focused on communication and safety. They organized an email list, a community cleanup day, and a phone tree for emergencies. No fees, no enforcement power, just neighbors helping neighbors. Margaret invited me to their first meeting, held in her living room on a Tuesday night. About 15 people showed up, and when I walked in, the room went quiet for a moment. Then Margaret stood and extended her hand. "Thank you for coming. And thank you for not bulldozing the neighborhood when you had every legal right to." I shook her hand. "I never wanted that. Just wanted my land protected." "Well, you got that," Lisa said from the couch. "And you handled it more fairly than a lot of people would have." We talked for an hour about practical things, snow removal, streetlights, whether anyone wanted to chip in for a neighborhood entrance sign now that the old HOA one had been taken down. It was boring, normal stuff. The kind of thing neighbors figure out without lawyers or lawsuits at the end of the meeting. A man I didn't recognize, someone who'd moved in recently and bought one of the Lee's back homes, raised his hand. "Can I ask a question?" he said. "Why didn't you just evict everyone and take the land back?" "You could have, legally." I thought about that for a moment. Because these are people's homes. Yeah, the HOA screwed up. The developer screwed up. But the families living here didn't forge that deed. They didn't encroach on purpose. They bought houses and tried to build lives. Kicking them out wouldn't have fixed anything. It would have just made me the kind of person I don't want to be. The room was quiet. Besides, I added, I'm a farmer. I need land to work, not houses to manage. As long as people respect the property lines and pay what's fair, we're good. Margaret smiled. That's more grace than a lot of people would show. Not grace, I said. It's just common sense. I spent a lot of time that first year walking the property, checking the boundary markers Tom Caldwell had placed, making sure the fence line was clear and maintained. It felt important somehow, to physically see the land and know where it began and ended. One afternoon in late fall, I walked the southern boundary, where it bordered the subdivision, and stopped at the spot where Derek had planted the first future. Amenity sign, the one that had started all of this. The sign was gone now. The stakes were gone. The pasture looked exactly as it had for 70 years. Grass, wildflowers, the occasional cow grazing in the distance. I stood there for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. I'd never wanted to own pieces of other people's houses. I'd never wanted to be a landlord or get involved in subdivision politics. I just wanted to keep the farm my great-grandfather had built, the land my family had worked for 3 generations. But when someone tries to take that from you, when they forge documents and plant signs, and tell you your own land isn't yours anymore, you don't have a choice. You either fight or you lose everything. So I fought, with deeds and surveys and patience. With attorneys and forensic experts, and the slow, boring machinery of property law, and I won. Not because I was smarter, or richer, or more powerful, but because I had the one thing that mattered, the truth, written on paper, recorded in ink, verified by 77 years of unbroken ownership. Derek had tried to build his authority on forged documents and bluster. He'd assumed I wouldn't. Notice, wouldn't check, wouldn't fight. He was wrong. I think about that sometimes when I'm working the farm moving cattle, fixing fence, cutting hay. I think about how much of the world runs on trust and assumptions, and how easily those things collapse when someone actually checks the paperwork. The HOA assumed they could file a fake deed and no one would verify it. The developer assumed they could build on my land and I'd never notice. Derek assumed he could intimidate me into walking away, and every single one of them learned the same lesson. Property law doesn't care about assumptions. It cares about deeds, about recorded titles, about who actually legally, provably owns the land. And when you show up with the real diet, a forged one, not a corrected plat based on lies, but the actual, verified, continuous chain of ownership going back decades, you win. It's not dramatic. It's not fast, but it's relentless. And in the end, the person holding the real deed always outlasts the person holding the fake one. The farm is still here. It's 3,200 acres, same as it's been since 1947. The cattle graze. The hay grows. The creek runs clear, and along the southern edge, where a subdivision tried to steal a piece of it, there's a quiet understanding now. I own the land. They live on it, under agreements we both signed, with terms we both understand. No lies. Number: fake documents. No pretending. Just honest paper, honestly recorded, protecting what's always been mine. Derek's gone. HOA is dissolved. And the people who tried to take my land learned what happens when you build a kingdom on forged signatures and assumptions. It collapses, slowly, legally, inevitably. Because property law is boring and slow and relentless, and it always favors the person who actually holds the deed. I walk back to the house as the sun sets over the ridge. The same ridge my great-grandfather stood on 77 years ago. When he first saw this land and decided it was worth fighting for, he was right. And I'm still here to prove it.